My story doesn't start with a bang. It starts with the quiet hum of a clunky desktop computer in a cramped Seattle apartment, the kind where the smell of rain and old books always hangs in the air, while other kids were outside scraping their knees and learning how to ride bikes. I was inside learning a different language, not Spanish or French, but Basic and C++. My world wasn't the playground. It was a universe of logic, gates, and if-then statements, a place where I could build entire worlds from scratch with nothing but my fingertips and a keyboard. My mom, Diane, was the one who saw the spark. She wasn't a tech person. She was a librarian, a woman who found magic in the printed word. But she recognized the same passion in me for code that she had for classic literature. She saved for 6 months to buy me that first computer, a Biox that whirred so loudly it could lull you to sleep. "This is your canvas, Vicky," she'd say, her hand on my shoulder, her voice warm like honey. "Go paint your masterpiece." She was my biggest believer, my quiet cheerleader. She'd bring me hot chocolate during my late night coding sessions and listen, really listen as I try to explain the elegant beauty of a perfectly optimized algorithm. Her belief in me was the bedrock of my world. And then when I was 14, the bedrock crumbled. Cancer. It was a swift, brutal thief that stole her from me, leaving a silence in our little apartment that the hum of the computer could no longer fill. The world went from vibrant color to a dull, muted gray. A year later, Robert Hayes entered the picture. He was a whirlwind of charisma and expensive calm. He swept my grieving father off his feet, and before I knew it, our quiet apartment was sold, and we were moving into his sprawling, sterile house in a wealthier suburb. With him came Chloe, his daughter, a girl my age, whose interests ran more towards her reflection in the mirror than anything else. I went from being the center of a small, warm universe to a forgotten moon orbiting a strange new planet. I never felt like I belonged. I was just there. Robert ran a marketing company, Hayes Digital. It was his pride and joy, but even as a teenager, I could see it was a dinosaur. He talked about synergy and brand identity in a way that felt like it was ripped from a 1990 business textbook. He was charming, I'll give him that, but he was also deeply traditional, a man who believed the old ways were always the best ways. He looked at my passion for coding as a quirky, unfeminine hobby. A girl like you should be out socializing. He'd often say with a patronizing smile, not cooped up with those machines. His world revolved around Chloe. She was the princess of his kingdom, a girl who could do no wrong. She got a new car for her 16th birthday. I got a lecture about how my computer was driving up the electricity bill. He'd praise her for getting a B in art class while completely ignoring the regional coding competition I'd won. It was a constant, grinding reminder that I was an outsider, the stepdaughter, the awkward, nerdy girl who didn't quite fit into his perfect picture. That feeling became the fuel for my fire. I decided if I couldn't earn his affection, I would earn his respect. I would become so successful, so undeniable, that he would have no choice but to see me. After high school, I didn't even think twice. I applied to one place, MIT. Getting that acceptance letter was the first time I felt that old spark of joy since my mom passed. It was my ticket out, my chance to finally build something for myself on my own terms. 4 years felt like a lifetime and no time at all. I dove into the world of machine learning and artificial intelligence, fields that were just beginning to explode. While my classmates were going to parties, I was in the lab, fueled by cheap coffee and the relentless desire to prove everyone, especially Robert, wrong. The day I graduated, cap and gown feeling foreign on my shoulders, I saw Robert and Chloe in the crowd. Clue was busy taking selfies, while Robert wore a polite, detached smile. He clapped, but it was the kind of clap you give at a stranger's piano recital. Later, at a celebratory dinner, he made a toast. To Victoria, he said, raising his glass. Hopefully, all that screen staring will finally pay off. Chloe snickered into her napkin. That was the moment. The condescension in his voice, the dismissive wave of his hand. It solidified my plan. I could have taken a 6-figure job at any tech giant in Silicon Valley. I had offers from Google, from Apple. But that would have been too easy. It would have meant leaving, letting him win. No, I was going to go back to Seattle. I was going to walk into his failing, outdated company, and I was going to save it. Not for him, but to show him once and for all what that screen staring could really do. I was 22 years old, armed with a degree from the best tech school in the world, and a fire in my belly that had been simmering for nearly a decade. I was going home to claim my victory. Walking into the Hayes digital office for the first time as an employee felt like stepping back in time. The air was stale with the smell of old paper and indifference. The computers were ancient, the software was archaic, and the marketing strategies, they were using involved cold calling and direct mail. The company was bleeding money, losing clients to younger, more agile firms that actually understood the internet. Robert, in his corner office, was a king ruling over a crumbling castle, completely blind to the fact that his kingdom was about to be washed away by the digital tide. He gave me a tiny cubicle in the back, a starter position with a vague title. He probably expected me to file papers or fetch coffee. On my first day, Clue waltzed in around noon, wearing designer clothes that cost more than my monthly salary. She glanced at my cubicle, wrinkled her nose, and said, "Oh, you're really doing this." How? Quaint. She then spent the rest of the day planning a weekend trip to Napa on her phone. I ignored her. I ignored the condescending pats on the back from the old guard employees who called me kiddo. I put on my headphones, shut out the world, and got to work. For the first 6 months, I was a ghost. I came in before the sun rose and left long after everyone else was gone. I spent my days analyzing their pathetic digital footprint and my nights building my weapon. My idea was simple in concept, but revolutionary in execution. An AI-driven analytics platform that could do more than just track clicks and impressions. I was building a predictive engine, a tool that could analyze millions of data points. Social media trends, consumer spending habits, even weather patterns, to predict what customers would want before they even knew they wanted it. It would tell a company not just who their customers were, but who they would be tomorrow. It could optimize marketing campaigns in real time, shifting ad spend automatically to the most effective channels. It was the future of marketing, and I was building it in a forgotten cubicle of a company that still thought the yellow pages were a viable strategy. I called the platform Nexus. When I had a working prototype, I scheduled a meeting with Robert. I walked into his office, laptop in hand, my heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and exhilaration. He was on the phone, laughing loudly about a golf game. He gestured for me to sit, making me wait for a full 10 minutes while he finished his call. "All right, Victoria, what's so important?" He said finally, leaning back in his chair, the picture of board authority. I took a deep breath and began my presentation. I showed him the data, the projections, the sleek user interface of Nexus. I explained how it could cut client acquisition costs by 40%, how it could increase conversion rates by a conservative 200%. I poured 8 years of ambition and countless sleepless nights onto his mahogany desk. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. He steepled his fingers, a smirk playing on his lips. It's a cute little project, Victoria, really. But we're a marketing firm, not a software company. We deal with people with relationships, not algorithms. The dismissal was so casual, so absolute, it felt like a physical blow. Robert, this is marketing, I pleaded. This is where the entire industry is heading. We're falling behind. This could save us. We don't need saving, he said, his voice turning sharp. We need to stick to what works. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I appreciate the effort, though. It shows initiative. I walked out of his office, the blood roaring in my ears, but I wasn't defeated. I was furious. That night, I made a critical decision. I went to a lawyer and incorporated my own company on the side, X Analytics. I filed for patents on the core algorithms of Nexus, registering all the intellectual property under my company's name. Then I drew up a licensing agreement. The next day, I went back to Robert. I didn't ask for his permission. I told him I was going to use my little project for one of our smallest, struggling accounts, a local coffee roaster that was on the verge of leaving us. I'll do it on my own time, I said. It fails, you can say, I told you so. But if it works, you agree to license the software from my company, Apex Analytics, for use by Hayes Digital. He saw it as a no-lose situation for him. If I failed, he got to put me in my place. If I succeeded, he could take the credit. He laughed and signed the agreement without even reading the fine print, which included a key person clause. The license was contingent on my continued leadership role in its implementation. I poured everything into that one account. For 3 months, I fine-tuned Nexus, working directly with the coffee roaster. The results were staggering. Their online sales tripled. Their social media engagement went up by 8,000%. They went from a small local name to a regional phenomenon. Word got out. Other clients started asking about the magic software the coffee company was using. Within a year, I was no longer in a cubicle. I was running a new digital analytics division, a division of one. Me. Client after client saw incredible growth. The company's revenue doubled, then tripled. Hayes Digital, the dinosaur, was suddenly the hottest tech, savvy marketing firm in Seattle. Big names started calling. First, it was a major local retailer, then a regional airline. The day Starbucks called was the day everything changed. They wanted a demonstration. Robert, who had ignored my work for years, suddenly wanted to be in the meeting. He tried to explain Nexus himself, fumbling with the terminology and calling it Victoria's clever little computer program. I had to step in and take over. We landed the contract. It was worth more than the company's entire revenue from the year before I started. Soon after, Amazon came knocking. Then Microsoft. By the time I was 30, I had single-handedly dragged Hayes Digital, kicking and screaming, into the 21st century. I had turned a failing company on the brink of bankruptcy into a tech marketing powerhouse valued at over $2,000 million. I was the engine, the architect, the rainmaker. My name was whispered with respect in boardrooms across the city. But in the halls of Hayes Digital, nothing changed. To Robert, I was still the stepdaughter playing with her computer. He took the credit in public, puffing out his chest at industry events, talking about his vision for the company's digital transformation. Clue was given a fancy, meaningless tight-lick, a vice president of brand synergy. She had an expensive office she rarely used and spent her days shopping, her salary paid by the profits my platform generated. At 28, she was still living off her father, a beautiful, useless parasite. The only person who truly saw me, who celebrated my victories, was Ethan. I met him at a charity event, a kind, steady high school history teacher whose world was beautifully, wonderfully separate from mine. He wasn't impressed by the valuation of the company or the jargon I used. He was impressed by me, by my passion, my drive. He was the calm in my storm, the one who would listen to me vent about Robert and Chloe for hours, who would remind me that my worth wasn't tied to a stock price or a man's approval. He was my anchor. And when he asked me to marry him, it was the easiest yes of my life. We planned the wedding, a beautiful, elegant affair at a historic hotel overlooking the water. I thought naively that this would be the moment things would finally change. That I was bringing a good man into the family. I was a massive success. I had given them everything. I thought that as I stood there in my white dress, Robert would finally look at me and see a daughter. How wrong I was. The betrayal, when it came, was more public and more brutal than I could have ever imagined. It happened on the happiest day of my life, a perfectly calculated strike designed not just to oust me, but to humiliate me, to erase me, and to remind me that in their eyes, I would always be worthless. The wedding ceremony was perfect. The sun set over Puget Sound, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ethan looked at me with so much love it felt like I could finally truly breathe. Standing there, holding his hands, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. For a fleeting moment, I forgot about the company, about Robert, about the constant nagging need to prove myself. I was just a woman, deeply in love, starting a new life. The reception was in full swing. The ballroom was filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. My friends from MIT were there, colleagues who respected me, Ethan's wonderful, warm family. I felt surrounded by genuine affection. Then it was time for the speeches. Ethan's best man told some funny, embarrassing stories from their college days. My maid of honor cried as she talked about our friendship. And then Robert stood up, tapping his glass for attention. A hush fell over the room. He was beaming, the very picture of a proud father of the bride. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "I'm Robert Hayes, and for those who don't know, I have the distinct pleasure of being Victoria's stepfather." He smiled at me, but his eyes were cold, like little chips of ice. I've watched Victoria grow from a quiet, awkward girl into a very determined woman. When she came to work at my company, Hayes Digital, she brought a lot of ideas. He paused, letting the word, ideas, hang in the air with a faint trace of condescension. And through a combination of her efforts and our firm's established reputation, we've seen some incredible growth. We've become a major player in the tech space, a true force to be reckoned with. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't a toast. It was a business announcement. And that growth, he continued, his voice rising, demands a bold vision for the future. It demands leadership that understands our core values, our family legacy. It requires a leader who has been groomed for this role, someone who carries the Hayes name with the pride it deserves. My blood ran cold. I looked at Ethan, and he squeezed my hand, his brow furrowed in confusion. I glanced over at Chloe. She was standing next to her father, a smug, triumphant smile spreading across her face. She knew she was in on it. "That is why," Robert declared, his voice booming through the ballroom, "it is my immense pleasure to announce the new CEO of Hayes Digital, effective immediately. My daughter, Chloe Hayes." The room erupted in a confused murmur. People looked from Chloe, who was preening under the spotlight, to me, the bride who had just been publicly blindsided. My friends looked horrified. My team from the office looked utterly bewildered. Chloe had never worked a real day in her life. She couldn't tell the difference between a server and a search engine. But Robert wasn't finished. The grand final of my humiliation was yet to come. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He fumbled around for a moment before producing a single, crumpled $20 bill. He walked over to me, his shadow falling over my white dress. The smile was gone from his face, replaced by a look of cold, final dismissal. He held the bill out to me. In front of our families, our friends, my entire world, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. We believe in paying for value, Victoria, and after careful consideration, we've determined that this is what you're truly worth to us. Time seemed to stop. The air was sucked out of the room. The only sound was the faint, mocking echo of Chloe's triumphant giggle. The crumpled bill, a meaningless piece of paper, felt like the heaviest thing in the world. It was a brand, a judgment, a final, crushing verdict on my life's work. Worthless. Every instinct screamed at me to cry, to yell, to throw a drink in his face. I could feel Ethan tensing beside me, ready to lunge at him. But then I looked past Robert's sneering face and saw my mom's. Not a ghost, but a memory clear as day. I saw her sitting with me at that old computer, her voice filled with unwavering belief. Go paint your masterpiece, Vicky. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The hurt, the shock, it crystallized into a cold, hard diamond of pure, unadulterated resolve. This was not an ending. This was a declaration of war. I held out my hand. My fingers didn't even tremble. I took the crumpled $20 bill from him. I smoothed it out, folded it neatly, and looked him straight in the eye. I let a small, calm smile touch my lips. Thank you? Robert, I said, my voice clear and steady, ringing through the stunned silence. This means more than you could possibly know. Then I turned to my new husband, tucked the bill into his jacket pocket, and said, shall we have our first dance? The honeymoon was supposed to be 2 weeks in Hawaii. We canceled it. Our honeymoon night was spent in the business center of our wedding hotel, a sterile room with bad lighting and the faint smell of toner. Ethan sat in one corner, fielding frantic calls from my friends and colleagues, telling them I was okay and that I'd explain everything soon. I sat at a computer, the glow of the screen illuminating my face the same way it had since I was a child. But this wasn't creation. This was controlled demolition. My masterpiece wasn't the AI I had built. My masterpiece was going to be this. The plan had been forming in the back of my mind for years, a contingency for a betrayal I always suspected was possible, though I never imagined it would be this cinematic. Robert was an old school businessman. He believed in handshakes and his own perceived authority. He never bothered to read the fine print. First, the contracts. I had personally negotiated every single one of our major client deals. Starbucks, Amazon, Microsoft, and the 17 others that made up over 95% of the company's revenue. And in every single one, at the advice of my lawyer, I had insisted on key person clause. It was a standard clause in many industries, especially tech. It stipulated that if the key individual responsible for the project's success, in this case, me, Victoria Mitchell, were to leave the company or be removed from a leadership role, the client had the right to terminate their contract immediately without penalty. Robert had signed off on every single one, too arrogant to believe I would ever be anything other than his loyal workhorse. Second, and far more importantly, was Nexus itself, the soul of the company, the AI platform I had built from the ground up. He called it Victoria's clever little computer program. He had no idea. Nexus wasn't a set of Hayes Digital. It was the exclusive intellectual property of my personal holding company, Apex Analytics. Hayes Digital didn't own the software. They merely used it based on a licensing agreement Robert had laughed at and signed without a second thought years ago. An agreement that was of course, contingent upon my employment. My termination was a direct breach of that license. With Ethan by my side, providing a steady supply of coffee and quiet support, I began to type. I drafted a polite, professional email. Subject: important update regarding my position at Hayes Digital in your contract, dear BU client name, and I am writing to inform you that, effective immediately, I am no longer with Hayes Digital. As you may know, our contract contains a key person clause, Section 7, paragraph BD, tied to my continued leadership on this account. This letter serves as formal notification, giving you the option to exercise your right to terminate the agreement. It has been a pleasure working with you. Sincerely, Victoria Mitchell. I personalized it for each of the top 20 clients and hit send on all of them just after 3 a.m. Next, I drafted a formal letter to the board of Hayes Digital, which consisted of Robert Clough and 2 of Robert's old golfing buddies. It was a cease and desist letter. It informed them that due to my unlawful termination, their license to use, access, or any way profit from the Nexus platform and all its associated data was immediately and irrevocably revoked. Continued use would constitute intellectual property theft and would be met with swift and aggressive legal action. I attached a copy of the licensing agreement with the relevant clauses highlighted in bright yellow. I scheduled it to be delivered by a legal courier to the office at 9:05 a.m. the next morning. Finally, I wrote my resignation letter. It was short and brutally simple. Robert, I accept the terms of my dismissal as announced at my wedding reception on August 21st. Please consider this my formal 2 weeks notice, though I will not be performing any further duties. My final invoice will be for $20. Victoria, by 5 a.m., it was all done. The digital bombs were planted and the timers were set. I leaned back in the cheap office chair, the adrenaline finally starting to fade, replaced by a profound and bone-deep exhaustion. Ethan came over and knelt beside me, taking my hand. "Are you sure about this, Vic?" he asked softly, his eyes full of concern. I looked at our intertwined hands, then up at his face. "He gave me $20, Ethan," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "He thinks that's my worth. I'm not doing this because I'm angry. I'm doing this because he's right about one thing. It's time to pay for value, real value." We didn't go into the office on Monday. Instead, I let the chaos unfold from a distance. My phone started blowing up around 9:30 a.m. First, it was emails from clients expressing their shock and invoking their termination clauses. Starbucks was the first. Amazon followed 10 minutes later. By lunchtime, 15 of our top 20 clients had pulled out. That was over $170 million in annual recurring revenue, gone in the span of 3 hours. Around noon, Robert started calling. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message, his voice tight with confusion and barely concealed panic. "Victoria, call me. We need to talk about these emails from our clients. There's been some kind of misunderstanding." An hour later, another voicemail. This one was angrier. "Victoria, what the hell did you do? The lawyers just dropped off some nonsense about this Apex company. You need to fix this now. Tried texting. OMG, Vicky, what is happening? Dad's going crazy. You need to call him." I ignored them all. Instead, I called my core team, the 3 brilliant engineers and 2 data scientists I had personally hired and mentored, the ones who had actually helped me scale Nexus. I met them for lunch and explained everything. I offered them all senior positions at Apex Analytics with significant salary increases and equity. By the time the check came, all 5 of them had quit Hayes Digital and joined me. On Tuesday morning, I finally went to the office. I didn't go to my old office. I went straight to Robert's. I didn't knock. He and Chloe were inside, their faces pale and drawn. Papers were scattered across his desk. Robert looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 days. Clue looked like she had been crying. "Victoria!" Robert blurted out, standing up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. "Thank God. You need to call these clients back. Tell them it was all a big misunderstanding, a joke that went too far at the wedding." "There was no misunderstanding," I said calmly, placing my resignation letter on his desk. Beside it, I placed the stack of contract termination letters from our clients. And on top of that, I placed the articles of incorporation for Apex Analytics and the patent certificates for Nexus. It was a neat little pile of ruin. Chilo burst into tears. "You can't do this! This is my company now. Daddy gave it to me." I looked at her, this woman child who had been handed the keys to an empire she didn't build and didn't understand, and felt nothing. No pity, no anger. Just a vast empty distance. "You're right. Chulu, it's your company now," I said, my voice even. "And as of this morning, your company is an empty shell. It has no major clients, no proprietary technology, and its most talented employees have just resigned. You own a brand name and some office furniture. Congratulations on your promotion." Robert stared at the papers, his face turning a blotchy red. The reality was finally sinking in, breaking through his layers of arrogance and denial. "Victoria, please," he stammered, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "We can fix this. We'll issue a press release. We'll tell everyone you're the president. Coezio! Whatever you want, just make the calls, turn your software back on." "The software is on," I replied, turning to leave. "It's just not yours anymore. You wanted me gone. You got your wish." His last, desperate plea followed me down the hallway. "But we're family?" I didn't even turn around. The collapse of Hayes Digital was faster and more spectacular than even I had predicted. The news of the mass client exodus hit the Seattle business journals within days. Investors, the ones who had flocked to the company because of its revolutionary tech, pulled their funding. The remaining employees, seeing the writing on the wall, started polishing their resumes. Within 2 weeks, the once mighty 200 million company was a ghost ship, adrift and sinking fast. They officially filed for bankruptcy 6 weeks after my wedding. While they were sinking, Apex Analytics was soaring. My phone didn't stop ringing, but now the calls were different. They weren't angry or panicked. They were from my former clients. "Victoria," the VP of marketing from Starbucks said over the phone, "we never cared about the Hayes Digital name. We signed because of you and because of Nexus. We're terminating our old contract, but we'd like to draw up a new one directly with Apex Analytics, and we'd like to double our investment." That one phone call was a $50 million deal. Amazon called the same afternoon, Microsoft the next morning. They all followed me without hesitation. My betrayal was seen by the industry for what it was: a brilliant strategist reclaiming what was rightfully hers. I wasn't the villain, I was the asset. We set up shop in a sleek, modern office space downtown with panoramic views of the city I had conquered. My team of 5 quickly grew to 50. The energy was electric, a palpable buzz of innovation and excitement. We were building something new, something that was entirely ours, free from the dead weight of the past. 3 months after the wedding, Apex Analytics underwent its first official valuation for a round of Series A funding. The number came back at $600 million. In 90 days, I had tripled my net worth. I wasn't just a success, I was a phenomenon. I was on the cover of tech magazines, hailed as one of Seattle's most influential and visionary leaders. And I didn't need Robert's approval anymore. I didn't need anyone's. The crumpled $20 bill sat on my new expansive desk. I had it framed, a simple black frame, and placed it right next to my computer monitor. It wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder of what I had overcome, a reminder of my own resilience, and a reminder that your worth is never, ever determined by the smallness of other people's minds. Ethan said it was the most expensive piece of art I owned because of what it cost me and what it had pushed me to achieve. One day, about a year later, my assistant told me Chloe was in the lobby. She didn't have an appointment. I told her to send her in. Chloe looked diminished. The designer clothes were still there, but they hung on her differently. The arrogant spark in her eye was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollow look. She sat awkwardly in the chair across from my desk, her gaze darting around my office at the bustling city below. Vicky. Victoria. She began, her voice trembling slightly. We lost everything. The cars, the horse. Dad, he's not doing well. I just listened, my expression neutral. I was wondering, she said, twisting her hands in her lap, unable to meet my eyes. Maybe there's a job for me here. Anything. I'll do anything. Reception, maybe. I leaned forward slightly, my hands folded on the desk. Chloe, let me ask you a question. In all the years I worked at Hayes Digital, what do you think my job was? She blinked confused. Well, you did the computer stuff. The analytics. I was the chief architect of a multi-million-dollar technology platform. I said, my voice soft but unyielding. I was the lead negotiator on every major contract. I was the head of strategy, product, and innovation. That was my job. What would be your job here? She had no answer. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. You didn't want a colleague, Chloe, I said finally. You wanted a magician. You wanted me to wave a wand and make your problems disappear, just like I did for your father for 8 years. But my magic doesn't work that way anymore. There's no job for you here. She left without another word. I didn't feel triumph, just a quiet, sad finality. A few weeks after that, a letter arrived. The return address was a small, unfamiliar apartment across town. It was from Robert. My hands hovered over it for a moment. Part of me was curious, wondering if it held an apology, an explanation, a final burst of rage. But as I looked at the envelope, I realized something profound. I didn't care what it said. His words, his validation, his anger, it was all irrelevant now. It had no power over me. My mother's belief had been the foundation, but the house I built on top of it was all my own. The $20 bill on my desk was no longer a symbol of betrayal. It was the cornerstone. I was invited to be the keynote speaker at a major tech conference. Standing on that stage, looking out at a sea of thousands of faces, I told my story, not all the bitter details, but the story of building something, of believing in yourself when no one else does. Afterward, as I was leaving, I walked past a trash can. I took Robert's unopened letter out of my bag and, without a second's hesitation, I dropped it inside. I didn't need to read it. I didn't need his apology or his excuses. I had found my peace, not in the destruction of his company, but in the construction of my own life. Apex Analytics was my masterpiece. My success was my answer. I was standing taller than ever, not because I had won a war against my family, because I had finally learned how to walk away from the battlefield. And that was a victory no one could ever take away from me.